Principle number 4, you are a creator. Often what happens if you're a creative individual, an intuitive individual, a great healer, provide great service, you think, if I get into business, I'm in my left brain, and that's not going to serve me well. But what I want you to start to understand, I just began to view that business is probably one of the most creative ventures available to you. How you build a business, design it. Start to think in terms of you're building a framework, you're building a foundation. Some of you have now built the practice with absolutely no foundation. So things like your organizational design. Do you have an office policy manual? Do you have a patient policy manual? Do you have a procedural manual? If I'm your patient, what do you lay out for me as far as my expectations? You know, what do I have to do to be a patient in your office? We just literally had people sign it. Not only did we review it with them, but we had them sign it. It was their commitment of what they were going to do to have the privilege of being in my practice. And one of those things included a healthcare class. They all knew, and they signed on the dotted line, that to be a patient in my clinic, you had to go to the healthcare class. But I'm also going to tell you that your policies and procedures are only as good as you actually following through on them. Because now what was going to happen if I told them that and I didn't really track whether they came to the healthcare class or not? Do you think that my care is even credible at that point? So just be very clear in your policies and be congruent with your policies. Because if you're going to put something in your policies, then you better follow through on it. Some of you say, well, if you miss an appointment and don't call us, you're charged for that appointment. And then when you call them to reschedule, you say, oh, that's okay, we're not going to charge you. Well, then get it out of your policy manual. But it's absolutely important that you have patients sign on that dotted line or commit eye to eye. I'm not saying every one of you actually has to have them sign it, but you've got to get that commitment. Part of the business is learning to create an organizational flow chart, a business flow chart. Now what happens is, here's where some of you turn off. If you're a sole practitioner, you're going to say to me, well, Janice, I can't hire all these people. I'm not asking you to. You play all these hats. It just means that we have to organize that a little differently. Because if you're going to play, and I'm going to show you 7 or 8 different categories, if you're going to play all those roles, all that it means is that you have to set different times through your week to play these roles. So the first one is CEO. The first thing I found about myself, the more I learned about business, is that I pretty much needed to fire myself as the CEO. Because what I realized, I ran a totally personality-driven practice in the beginning. You know, it's like my energy, and I was really excited, and I was so passionate, and I was principled. Sometimes what I found is that I just so bloody well overwhelmed people with that. Other times it was great, but it was just all personality-driven. And I realized that that wasn't sustainable from the Gerber model. So the Gerber model and then great coaches in my life taught me to create a totally systems-driven practice. And the beauty, I then became a CEO because I didn't make all the systems dependent on me. But as the CEO, you notice I've written here that you are literally just focusing on growth and expansion of your business. So where and when in your week are you doing nothing but this? It could be 10 minutes to start. My preference is, say, half an hour or an hour somewhere in your week that what you do is you think about what it takes to build the business. And one of the doctors said to me yesterday, wow, you know, I'm just so busy, you know, it's great, I think that I'm going to do this and set the time, but everything comes up. Well, of course everything's going to come up. And it's going to keep coming up. But that doesn't stop you from setting half an hour in your schedule where you lock your door and you just focus on building the business. Many other categories, director of operations, who creates the systems? Remember, I said I created systems so they weren't dependent on me, thank God, because some days I would have remembered to do them and some days I wouldn't. But by having such a great team, and this is where CAs, you play such a critical role, take some of these things away from your doctor. We talked about that in the CA certification. You know, I'm looking forward. Lisa and Lindsay and I are going to do another CA class in Philadelphia because we haven't done one for a while. We teach your CAs, doctor, that they should just do it and take you out of it because they're better at this than you are. So start to think through these roles, the systems. You need a director of operations, or you need to set some time so you build some systems in your clinic. Director of public relations. Many of you, that's you again, but set some time. Or Does it always have to be that you hire someone full-time? I know this is what many say when we talk about training with Michelle Gallervino. Well, I don't have the finances to now pay a person to do this full-time for me. Well, remember, if you go back to the principle we talked about a few minutes ago about return on investment, it's probably one of your greatest return on investments. But one of our winner circle doctors, what she recognized is, who says I need someone full-time? And she's hired an amazing woman who works about 4 to 6 hours a week for her. Within the first 2 weeks of this woman working for her, she was booked up for 3 months in advance for talks and events and shows. Do you think that that's a great return on that investment? So start to think about, maybe I could have someone do this a few hours a week. Director of sales. Who is in charge of follow-through on your, all of the different things you put in, like the orthotics or your nutrition? Even your report of findings has a certain aspect of sales to it. Who's your case manager, your patient advocate? Who's your director of accounting? Like I said, many of you need to fire yourself because we're talking about business this morning, and you're not strong necessarily in business, so get someone who can do some of these things for you. As a CEO, you always need them reporting back to you, and my preference is that they report back to you in writing. Before I instigated that in my clinic, one of my CAs would come to me and say, okay, you asked me to do this and I've done it. And by the end of the day, I thought, did I hallucinate that they told me that? Or did they really tell me that they already have that handled? So I started to get my team to every week report to me in writing what was handled, what were they working on, and I wanted that on Friday before I left the clinic so that by Monday I'd already had a chance to review it before our staff meeting. Director of Customer Service. This is one of the most important positions in your clinic as far as I'm concerned. You are in a business and you need to start to survey the patients. What are their needs? What do they want? What can you provide? I've gone through these very quickly, but I want you to just start to think in terms of, do you have these people in place, or do you do these roles and set the actual time to overview them? Even if you're still the director of accounting, I don't like that you're just doing some bills and things every day, just fitting it in between patients. Set a time through your week where you sit down, you review all of your bills, all of the expenses, make the payments, do the payroll, and then be done with it so you get out of that head and that energy. So set the business design in place.